Coming up, I'll talk about Trump's spectacular nomination of Kash Patel to be director of the FBI. I also want to talk about this sex abuse scandal involving Pete Hegseth and what that's going to do to his chances to be Secretary of Defense. And Miranda Devine, columnist for the New York Post, joins me. We're going to talk about Trump's appointments, the future prospects of the Biden family, Kamala Harris, and the Democratic Party. Hey, if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble, listening on Apple, Google, or Spotify, please subscribe to my channel. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
I want to talk in this opening segment about two of Trump's nominations, the new one and one that came out earlier, which was Pete Hegseth. The new one, of course, is Kash Patel. And I've got to say, I'm extremely excited about the Kash Patel appointment. Kash Patel for director of the FBI. This, I think, is the ultimate, well, as I said in my post on Twitter, on X, the ultimate suppository. Because this Kash appointment, I think, is the perfect appointment to bring the necessary intellectual and legal and perhaps even physical bulldozer into the FBI. This has become one of the most rotted institutions of our culture. It needs to be smashed. It needs to be decentralized. It needs to be remade from the ground up. You need lots of people to be held accountable, not just at the top level, but even the lower level henchmen who knowingly were doing very bad things. And Kash, I believe, is the man to do it. But let me get back to Kash in a moment. I want to talk about very briefly this New York Times article bashing Pete Hegseth and apparently outing a private email that Pete Hegseth's mom sent to Pete. And the email, at least as quoted in the Times, I will have to say is pretty disturbing because his mom says, I'm going to quote just a few lines, "On behalf of all the women, and I know it's many you have abused in some way, I say get some help and take an honest look at yourself." This is Penelope Hegseth writing, quote, "I have no respect for any man that belittles, lies, cheats, sleeps around, and uses women for his own power and ego. You are that man and have been for years, and as your mother, it pains me and embarrasses me to say that, but it is the sad, sad truth." Now, it is important, first of all, we have to realize that for anyone to get this kind of an email from your own mom is pretty humiliating. And moreover, as you look at the details of this Pete Hegseth situation, I'm thinking specifically of the woman who says that that he assaulted her. Pete Hegseth basically says no, the sexual relationship was consensual, kind of a one-night stand. But Pete has had a very tumultuous private life, and all of this, I think, is a disgrace. Now, in fairness, his mom has said, "I regret sending that email." She says that she did it in a kind of emotional outburst. She also says that she immediately sent her son a follow-up email apologizing for what she did. She had written the earlier email in anger when Pete was going through a divorce. And she says, "I know my son, he's a good father. He's a good husband." It does look like Pete has a fairly normal family life today. And I don't think that this is something distasteful, though it all is. I agree with Megyn Kelly in this respect. I don't think it is something that can, or perhaps even should, prevent him from getting this Secretary of Defense job. But it is quite clear it's going to come up. It is going to be dirty laundry. It is something he's going to have to explain and deal with. It is regrettable. In other words, it would be much better if people didn't do this kind of stuff and put themselves in these kinds of situations. Is the New York Times ruthlessly exploiting it? Yes. Is the left going to try to make hay of it? Yes. But nevertheless, why put ammunition in their in their hands. Now, having said that, let me turn to cash for a moment. And I expected a massive freak out, and sure enough, turn on the MSNBC, and you can see guest after guest after guest coming on to pile on cash. And they all seem to think this is the worst appointment of all. And again, the way we've learned to read these people, when they say this is the worst appointment of all, you know it's the best appointment. You know it's the appointment that's going to actually hold these people accountable. When they say things like Cash isn't really qualified, well, all you have to do is read the Trump Post, which lays out Cash's qualification. He's eminently qualified for this job. What they mean is not that he's a, quote, danger to democracy. He's a danger to their evil bureaucracy. They conflate the two, because they know that the American people don't care about their evil bureaucracy. The American people would want that to be smashed. And so they make a false equation, a sleight of hand from their evil bureaucracy to democracy, as if Cash needs to be stopped because he somehow threatens American democracy. Susan Glasser, who's one of the who is one of the Obama coterie, Obama worshippers and part of that ugly circle. She goes, worth noting that there is already, in fact, a Trump-appointed FBI director. This is a kind of a sly dig at Trump for appointing Christopher Wray, which in fact Trump did. He extended Christopher Wray in 2016. And here's what I write. I say, look, this is the difference between Trump 2016 and Trump 2024. Then, this was Trump's philosophy. Let me try and work with these nice people. I think Trump genuinely thought that. He thought, look, Christopher Wray seems like an upstanding guy. He's going to do his job. Let me try to make peace with the establishment to see if I can function within that framework. But he's realized that that was a serious mistake. In fact, part of my worry about Trump was that because Trump is a very magnanimous guy. You notice that he's willing to overlook past atrocities. Oh yeah, Joe Scarborough and Mika, come see me. Oh, Justin Trudeau, fly down to Mar-a-Lago. This is not to say that Trump is agreeing with them or giving in to them, but he's willing to hear them out. He's willing to sit down with them. This is Trump. And part of my concern was that Trump will, has Trump fully ingested the lessons of 2016? Has he fully realized the depth and the width of the police state? Does he recognize what needs to be done to go after these people? And Trump has now answered this question. He's answered it with his appointments. He's shown by picking certain people and not others that he recognizes entirely what is at stake. So Trump's new philosophy, I think, can be summarized this way. I now know where all the snakes are. It's time to smash their heads in. And that is the meaning of the Cash appointment. While Margaret Brennan, she says, former National Security Advisor John Bolton compares Kash Patel to one of Stalin's feared Secret Service police chiefs. No, wrong. Actually, Cash is better described as the chief prosecutor in the Nuremberg trials. He's going to hold these National Socialists and their whole regime of blind goons accountable for their crimes. Overall, I think these Trump picks are spectacular. They reflect a new sort of resolve on the part of Trump. And there may be a little element of vengeance in all this. Let's settle some scores. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. Very often, vengeance is nothing more than a formula for rough justice, right? Some other guy comes and runs over you with his car, and you realize, listen, I need to teach that guy a lesson. I'll do it the legal way. I'll do it through legal channels, but I'll do it nevertheless. I think that's the message that Trump is trying to send loud and clear to the Democrats. Hey, the country's in a new place. For those of us holding our breath for the past several months, we can exhale. Work can finally be done on the major issues the country is facing, one of the most significant being our national debt. And here the bad news is our nation is largely broke, and debt is a house of cards. Well, you can't quickly fix it or dismantle it. And so your strategy, my strategy remains the same. Diversify our savings. That's why Debbie and I buy gold from Birch Gold. So many things are out of our control, even out of the president's control. It's important to have a safe haven for your savings. Birch Gold Group, my gold company, will help you to convert an IRA or 401k into an IRA in physical gold. And the best news, it won't cost you a penny out of pocket. Here's the way to get started. Text Dinesh to 989898. Get your free information kit. Diversify your savings with Birch Gold. Text Dinesh to 989898. Claim your eligibility for free silver today. Are you feeling overwhelmed by the increasing cost of health insurance? Have you had enough of not having control over your healthcare dollars? Introducing Share Right. It's healthcare done the right way. At Share Right, you're not just a number, you're part of a caring community. And forget about paying excessive premiums. With Share Right, you stand to save 30 to 50% compared to health insurance. So think about what you could do with all those savings. But it's more than just savings. Share Right ensures you have access to the care you deserve precisely when you need it, from routine checkups to unexpected emergencies. With Share Right, your healthcare is their top priority. Empower yourself today. Take control of your healthcare costs. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh to learn more and see how much you can save. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh. That's shareright.org/Dinesh for healthcare done the right way. Guys, I'm delighted to welcome to the podcast the one and only Miranda Devine. She's a New York Post columnist, also a contributor to a Fox News channel. She also does some work with the Australian media. She's a writer for the Daily Telegraph and also a contributor to Sky News. Follow her on X at Miranda Devine, the website nypost.com, and her latest book, which is about the Biden family corruption. It's called The Big Guy. Miranda, thank you very much for joining me. And perhaps an opportunity to undo a lot of the really bad stuff that was going on, some of it out in the open, some of it behind the scenes over the past 4 years.
Thanks for having me, Dinesh. Look, I could not agree with you more. There's really a palpable feeling in the air. I mean, even right down to the sort of new wholesome family ads that were being aired on TV over the Thanksgiving holiday. It just feels as if we had a sliding door moment on November 5th and we chose the right door to go through. And suddenly the future looks bright. And I think we needed to go through the 4 years of misery or almost 4 years under Joe Biden as president, to have the sort of mythology that the Democrats had built about Joe Biden as honest Joe and a compassionate man who was going to unite the country, to see that that was a complete lie, starting, I think, with the incompetence that he showed during the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan, when you saw his popularity in the polls just plummet and never recover. To his mismanagement of the economy, his overspending, wars around the world, a world on fire, and his relentless lawfare against Donald Trump, but also against all those January 6 protesters who were treated like the scourge of humanity, very differently to the way that the Summer of Love, all those BLM Antifa protesters were treated, when, they firebombed cops in New York, and they also besieged the White House in June of 2020, to the point where Donald Trump and his family had to be rushed to an underground bunker in the middle of the night to protect them from these rampant hordes of violent rioters who had overwhelmed the Secret Service and the Park Police. So I think the American people just instinctively, no matter what side of the fence they were on, could see this two-tiered system of justice, and also had enough street smarts or wit to understand that when a democracy or a republic descends into that kind of lawlessness, that no one is safe.
It almost reminds me, in a weird way, I'd like to, Miranda, let me put it this way. It almost feels like we're in 1980 all over again. And here's what I mean. Reagan, of course, had run against Gerald Ford in 76, but he lost in the primary. And then Jimmy Carter, of course, became the president. You had 4 years of just not so much malevolence as utter incompetence. But that really paved the way for the Reagan Revolution. And Reagan, in a sense, was probably better off to have come in 1980 than he would have been had he come in 76. And I feel somewhat the same about Trump. Although I genuinely believe Trump won the 2020 election, I don't think he would have had the same opportunity that he does now, the country having been through all of this, to open up possibilities that didn't even exist in 2020. I'm thinking about opportunities for really reforming the way that government functions, maybe cutting wasteful programs at a level we've never seen before, perhaps abolishing a department or two, certainly cleaning house in places like the FBI. Do you sense that there is a kind of wider avenue of possibilities in 2024 than Trump could conceivably have enjoyed in 2020?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's a great pity that the country has had to endure this. And I mean, not least of which the millions of illegal migrants that have been ushered across the border by Joe Biden and his border czar Kamala Harris, which will be a devil of a problem to remove. I know that Trump has said he will deport them, but I think it'll be very difficult to deport all of them. And all of them should be deported, whether they're law-abiding or not. But I mean, the fact that you had Venezuelan jails, just as Donald Trump said and was mocked, emptied out, and the criminals, the rapists, the murderers, the gang members descending on our cities is just, a tragedy for the United States. But I think we had to get to that level, really, to allow Donald Trump and his administration to do the harsh medicine that it's going to take, particularly with these agencies like the FBI. Kash Patel being nominated to head the FBI is just an incredible signal that Donald Trump is sending, that it's no longer business as usual. This is war against those people who perverted the course of justice, who took over the Federal Bureau of Investigation that was supposed to be about fidelity, bravery, and integrity, and turned it into just an arm of the Democratic Party that started persecuting mothers at school board meetings, fathers praying outside abortion clinics, sending SWAT teams to raid innocent, law-abiding family people in their homes at dawn. This was just a terrible manipulation of the legal process. And Kash Patel, who Devin Nunes once famously said he hired to help investigate the Russiagate hoax because he wanted someone who would smash down doors. And that's what Kash Patel is. He was instrumental in exposing Russiagate, and he knows how these agencies work. He is extremely savvy and won't be snowed. And I think that's the problem in the first administration, Trump administration, where he had more establishment types who either were naive or were content with being sort of managed and massaged from below when they ran these agencies, and just had the wool pulled over their eyes, whether by choice and weakness, or just because they were too clueless to understand it. That is not going to happen with someone like Kash Patel. So I think this is a great opportunity. I know Kash has talked about, and a lot of reformers, former high-level FBI people who I've talked to say that the way to reform the FBI and quickly is to remove the intelligence arm from it, which has really been at the root of all the malfeasance, at least during the Trump era and slightly before. And just get the FBI agents out doing what they're supposed to be doing and what the American people think they do, which is to track down critical criminals across the country.
This is actually very, I think, revealing about Trump, because I was a little worried when you look at the people that Trump brought in 2016. It's almost as if Trump said, let me try to work with these nice people. I'll bring in a general. Generals are habituated to doing what they're told. General Kelly is going to be a very reliable man to carry out what my policy objectives, and let me work with the nice people at the FBI. They have a sterling reputation over the years. And I think now we're seeing a completely different Trump. It's almost as if Trump has realized, I've just now realized that all these places are full of crawling snakes, and instead of me approaching all this with the let me work with these nice people philosophy, I need to go in there with, and smash some heads in here, because we got to clean these places out. It's a different psychology, and I think his appointments reflect a Trump who has been bruised by the process and has certainly learned his lesson.
Yes, he's been red-pilled for sure, particularly by, the sort of deep state shenanigans that crippled most of his presidency with the Russiagate hoax. And then afterwards with the lawfare that he quite rightly pings on Joe Biden and his minions around the different states, New York and Georgia. The attempt to render him impossible to elect. But the American people, to, I think, the Democrats' enormous surprise, were wise to them. Partly, I think that's because Elon Musk bought Twitter and freed up one channel of communication so that the truth could filter out without being could come out without being filtered by the usual media gatekeepers, who are really an arm of the Democratic Party, and not just that, but of the blob, of the deep state, of the intelligence agencies. And so it's interesting that you mention all the generals that Donald Trump employed in his first administration. That was a huge mistake, because he was really, they were the sort of arm of the deep state, of the blob. And they tried to manipulate him in whatever way they could to follow the agenda that the blob had used to control other presidents. They did with Obama, and they did again with Joe Biden. And while their agenda is not written down, you can see the outline of it from the foreign policy results from both those Democratic presidents, with disastrous impact around the world, whereas Donald Trump came in and he's ornery, he's uncontrollable, which is why those generals came to loathe him, because I don't think they're good at taking orders themselves. I think they're used to giving orders, as long as it goes along with that agenda, and they wouldn't have risen to the top without abiding and imbibing that agenda. And so they were angry that Donald Trump refused to take orders. He felt quite rightly that he's the president of the people, and he's not going to be taking orders from anybody other than the American people. And so he approached everything from first principles, like a developer from Queens that he is. And particularly with foreign policy, you saw the results, which were that Iran was broke, on its knees, unable to fund its proxies to attack Israel, as it did last October 7. You saw North Korea was in its box, even though Barack Obama had warned Donald Trump that North Korea was the biggest problem they faced, because Kim Jong-un insisted on detonating all these nuclear missile tests. And Donald Trump was mocked for his bromance with Kim Jong-un, but it worked. He did similarly with Vladimir Putin. Trump was very belligerent and speaks sort of a gangster patois, and that is understandable to the gangsters that are our adversaries around the world, including Vladimir Putin and others. And Putin wasn't quite sure if Trump was joking or bluffing when he said something along the lines of, I like the look of those golden domes in Moscow, would be a shame if something were to happen to them. And as a result, Putin did not invade any of his neighbors as he did under Obama and Biden. And then, of course, you had the Abraham Accords in the Middle East, the glimmerings of peace there. All in all, it was a hugely successful foreign policy outcome for Donald Trump's 4 years. Not that he would ever get any credit for any of it.
We'll be right back with Miranda Devine. MyPillow is excited to announce that the MyPillow Christmas Extravaganza is finally here. Get this season's flannel sheets for as low as $59.98. They won't last long, so get them while you can. They're famous My Slippers. These haven't been on sale for over a year. They are regularly priced at $119.98, but for a limited time are only $59.98. Debbie and I own them. We love them. And the 6-piece towel sets are back in stock with limited quantities, only $29.98. With hundreds of MyPillow products, there's something for everyone on your Christmas list, from bathrobes, duvets, quilts, down comforters, and so much more. Here's the number to call, 800-876-0227. Again, it's 800-876-0227, or go to mypillow.com. Make sure to use promo code Dinesh to save on all the MyPillow products. Flannel sheets, $59.98. 6-piece towel sets, $29.98. But that's not all. They're extending their 60-day money-back guarantee until March 1st, 2025. Plus, all orders $75 or more have free shipping as well. I'm back with Miranda Devine, columnist at the New York Post, also Fox News contributor. Her latest book, The Big Guy, about Biden family corruption. Follow her on X at Miranda Devine. Miranda, here's an interesting article just out from Andy McCarthy at National Review. And its basic theme appears to be, well, here's the title, Trump Needs to End Lawfare. And it's almost like if you naively were to look at the title, you think that Trump had been doing a bunch of lawfare and he needs to end it. I think, of course, what Andy McCarthy means is that he needs to bring democratic lawfare to a stop. But there appears to be a kind of worry that McCarthy is also conveying that Trump will somehow go after the people who did the lawfare. And I think Andy seems to think that's a mistake. And it's a mistake because, in his view, it makes us like them. We now are replicating their lawfare tactics. Two wrongs don't make a right. You can see where this is going. And yet, to me, I don't know any other way to stop a bully other than to, punch him a little bit and kick him in the shins and show him that that kind of bullying tactic is not going to work, and there needs to be some real accountability. What is your take on this issue of whether or not we just need to stop the bad guys and kind of move on to other issues, versus the notion that a lot of people who have acted very badly need to pay a price and then we can move on?
Yeah, I agree with you. And look, it doesn't have to be a wholesale sacking of Rome, but certainly there should be some surgically precise removals and accountability for chosen people. There is a list as long as your arm. And I think we all know who they are. And at some point, I think they will see accountability as is correct within the law. But many laws were broken and many untoward things were done. So I think the first step will be through the various agencies' transparency. Kash Patel talks about, having a sort of a Bureau of Declassification or a Truth and Reconciliation Commission or whatever you call it, at which all these agencies have to bring in their classified documents, most of which have been over-classified. And then, people go through them and determine which ones don't need to be classified for national security reasons or, to safeguard criminal prosecutions or investigations. And Kash Patel estimates about half of the documents should come out. I mean, we're also talking about things, historical issues like the JFK assassination, which was due to be released, those documents, in 2017. And Donald Trump has bemoaned the fact that he was convinced, I think by Mike Pompeo, his Secretary of State, former director of the CIA, not to release them, presumably because it would hurt the image of the CIA or damage whatever CIA people might still be alive. Who knows? But I don't think he'll be making that mistake again. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. There's a lot of corruption, not just financial corruption, but power corruption in Washington, and secrecy allows it to fester. And then there should be heads on pikes. Various people who have broken the law should be held up as exemplars for the future, because I think Donald Trump's mistake when he came in 2017 was to be magnanimous, not to follow through on his threats to lock Hillary Clinton up. There was a lot that she could have been prosecuted for, and she wasn't. He decided that it would be bad for the country to have that kind of divisiveness. And when you are magnanimous like that, you expect that your adversary is going to react in kind. Instead, they saw that as a sign of weakness. They doubled down, they entrapped Trump and people around him. And it has been never-ending and accelerating system of warfare and attacks from the deep state ever since. So it needs to be set back on its heels. And I think you need to do more than just tackle the system and fire people and shame them. I think there really have to be criminal outcomes for people who have committed crimes. They can't get away with it.
I was thinking a little bit, listening to what you just said about the Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and their idea of exposing government inefficiency. And it occurred to me that just as valuable as providing to Trump a list of wasteful regulations and a list of incompetent bureaucrats and so on, Elon Musk has Twitter, right? He has X. And so you can use this massive public platform with 800 million people on it to give public exposure, and I suppose to some degree public humiliation, saying this is what this department is funding and so on. So it occurs to me that as you do declassification, all this information can now be amplified, and the press, the mainstream press, can't block it because there are now platforms, and by the way, Twitter's one of them, there are others as well, to kind of get this information widely out so that it's almost like we now can turn over every rock and see what has been happening inside of this government at so many different levels. I mean, just to mention a very small one that's come out recently, Mark Andreessen in the Rogan show talks about all these big high-tech guys trying to break new ground with technology innovations, including crypto, and they all get their bank accounts closed. And with no legitimate reason given at all. And so all this stuff has been going on. A lot of people don't know about it. And it's quite clear, like Rogan was shocked out of his mind. He's like, he had never heard of it. And so the American people need to know what has been going on, don't they?
Absolutely. And that's a great point. It's not just Twitter. I kind of use that as a bit of a kind of shorthand, but it is this whole new constellation of, you can't call them right wing because Joe Rogan certainly isn't right wing, but it's a free speech, no holds barred, free media that is unconstrained by the whatever the sort of agenda is of the New York Times. And so, I mean, a Mark Andreessen's interview where he talked about the debanking and the sort of attacks on the crypto bros, and I think I think he also, certainly during that conversation, there was talk about AI and how the Biden administration was trying to control AI and would have succeeded if they'd won the election, which is absolutely frightening. And so, whether it's Rogan, whether it's Rumble, whether it's your podcast, there's a whole lot of voices out there now with millions and millions of listeners. And so the sort of mainstream media gatekeepers that have controlled information for so long are finding themselves powerless. And I think there's no better example of that than what happened on November 5. They had lied relentlessly about Donald Trump, called him Hitler, et cetera. And what did the American people do? They gave him the popular vote. Coast to coast, they voted for Hitler. So obviously they did not believe the media lies. And I think, if you're at MSNBC, if you're a viewer, one of their few viewers that they have left, If you woke up on November 6th and Hitler is in power, and then you find out that Joe and Mika, your favourite morning hosts, have hightailed it to Mar-a-Lago to suck up to Donald Trump, your head must be spinning. I would imagine that there's a lot of disillusionment going on in those circles. And maybe that's why we have sort of silence from the resistance front at the moment, as they're so befuddled and just don't know what to believe anymore. I mean, of course, the more sinister and probably more likely explanation is that the resistance is gone underground to finesse their new attacks on Trump and on all his appointees or nominees that they really hate, people like Pete Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard and so on.
Miranda, you have an article in which you discuss some new information involving the guy who shot Bird, I guess his name is, who shot Ashli Babbitt, and I see there's some debate about what Trump should do with regard to, well, I guess January 6th protesters, but you could extend this to, we know a woman, for example, who was facing a pretty long prison sentence for violating the FACE Act.
Yeah.
And this is Bevelyn Beatty. She was just standing at the Planned Parenthood facility in New York. Somebody opened a door and then claimed that their hand got stuck in the door. Bevelyn was on the outside, so she had no way to control what happened, but she's now supposedly a violent protester obstructing this clinic. What should Trump pardon the non-violent January 6th protesters? Should he pardon them all? Should he do it on day one? If Trump were to just call and say, Miranda, advise me on this. How you've been covering this? How should I handle this situation to really bring true justice to what has been happening here?
Look, I think that day one, he should convene a panel, an independent panel, to look at each one of these January 6 prosecutions, violent or non-violent, and to weigh the evidence and the punishments against equivalent sort of rioting on the left. I mean, it doesn't even have to be on the left, but equivalent rioting in history. And look, I don't think there's any problem if he pardons the violent as well as the non-violent, because there's precedents for it. Bill Clinton pardoned Susan, I think her name was Rosenberg. She was a terrorist, domestic terrorist who'd bombed the Capitol. So, there's very selective memory on the left about this. Look, there probably are people in that group that were, violent and did deserve the sentences they got. But, there are people who just wandered through an open door. Or in the case of one guy from Arkansas who I interviewed, he says, and he has video to show it because he had his phone up, he was kind of pushed through in this huge mob crowd through the doors as they were surging through. He couldn't have done anything. He couldn't have got out without getting trampled. So there are a lot of people in that boat. And you have to also assign blame to Nancy Pelosi and to a lesser extent, I guess, Mitch McConnell, whose sergeants at arms controlled the Capitol Police Board and who refused frequent requests from Steve Sund, the then Capitol Police Chief, for National Guard backup. He knew with so many millions of people, or hundreds of thousands of people anyway, coming to see Trump at the Ellipse, that there was going to be a problem and his small police force was going to be outnumbered. And completely, contrary to all precedent, the National Guard were explicitly told they could not go, first of all, by the DC mayor, an ally of Nancy Pelosi. And then we had the acting Defense Secretary, Chris Miller, put out this bizarre memo a couple of days before January 6, explicitly saying that the DC National Guard could not be called out without his express permission on January 5 and January 6. So why did he do that? Well, we know now that General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, was running around paranoid that Donald Trump would stage a coup and try with the military and try and stay in power. This is just a fever dream of the left. It was running around military circles and exacerbated by various articles in the New York Times and the Washington Post, an open letter from a whole bunch of former generals saying, or defense secretaries saying, that there should be no military involvement in the election process. Again, giving the green light to Milley, etc., to ban the National Guard from coming in to basically bail out Steve Sund and his overwhelmed Capitol Police officers. So it was a setup. Of course, as soon as those rioters or those protesters get to the Capitol and then some, miscreant among them breaks a window and starts climbing in, then you're just going to have this mob come in, and they met no resistance. There should have been, it's the broken windows policy, there should have been adequate policing at the Capitol to ensure something like that doesn't happen. I'm not excusing the rioters and the people who were violent. I think it was a shameful day in America. But the punishments that have been accorded them, I think, have been, in most cases, seem to be wildly disproportionate. And secondly, we have to correct the narrative that the Democrats so cleverly managed to entrench in the sort of historical record, which is that this was an armed insurrection during which police officers were killed. That's all a lie. There were no arms. It was not an insurrection. No police officers were killed. The only person who was killed during the riot was Ashli Babbitt, a diminutive female, a military veteran, unarmed, who was shot by a cop, Michael Byrd, who was never given the treatment that all the cops, we saw previously, white cops who shot black suspects, black victims. They were pilloried and their identities exposed, no matter the merits of the case. But Michael Byrd was given kid gloves treatment. His identity was kept secret for many months. And he was allowed to take off work for a year, being paid. He then got a promotion. He got a $36,000 bonus, and he was basically feted as a hero. He has a record of a shocking record of sort of malfeasance, I guess you'd call it, of mishandling his firearm. He left a loaded firearm in the Capitol Hill Visitors Centre at one point, just a few months before this. There's a lot of sort of misbehaviour in his record, and there are several entries are missing as well. And so this guy, you would think, with his record of mishandling his gun, might have had at least a slap on the wrist for killing an unarmed protester, but instead he was feted as a hero.
Well, Miranda, I want to commend you for your work on this stuff, because you have brought it to light with a vividness that helps us understand it in context and really see the full horror of what has happened here. Guys, I've been talking to Miranda Devine of the New York Post. Follow her on X at Miranda Devine. Check out the book, The Big Guy. Miranda, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much, Dinesh.
Guys, I'm talking about my book, The Big Lie, in paperback now. This is the cover right here, and be cool if you get a copy of it. You can pick it up off Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Follow along with our discussion of fascism and Nazism. And today we're going to talk about the intellectual leader, the philosopher, if you will, of fascism. This is a man named Giovanni Gentile. And I begin my section on him with the quotation, "For fascism, the state and the individual are one." So we've been talking about a number of bogus definitions of fascism. Fascism is the same as just nationalism. Fascism is militarism. Fascism is authoritarianism. And right here with a single quotation, you get to much closer to the heart of what fascism is. For fascism, the state and the individual are one. Now, let's talk a little bit about Gentile, and as we get to understand him, and we're going to try to understand him sympathetically. This may seem a little surprising. What, Dinesh, are you going to treat a philosopher of fascism sympathetically? Well, we're going to try to understand what he believed, why this was appealing. Let's remember, the fascists won power in a number of countries, and even though we think the fascists all came to power by force, it's not entirely true. Mussolini, for example, was constitutionally named as the leader of Italy. Hitler's party was the largest party in Germany when Hitler was made the chancellor. So these are people who, at least to an extent, went through the democratic process. And sometimes what you have is you might have leaders, political leaders, who are thuggish, who are authoritarian, but it doesn't mean that the philosophers who inspired them approved of this kind of thuggery. In other words, it's possible to envision a fascist ideology that is a little different from the way it was carried out by Mussolini and by Hitler. And we will discover in Giovanni Gentile someone who we should identify with fascism circa 1915 or 1920. Not fascism circa 1945 after World War II, the fascism of concentration camps and the fascism of the Holocaust. This has nothing to do with Gentile himself. So he was, in fact, an academic guy. He was a student of Hegel and another philosopher named Henri Bergson. He was a respected intellectual in Italy. He's the director of the Encyclopedia Italiana, and he was widely published in the Italian media. Now, what did Gentile believe? He begins actually in a kind of way that we can identify with ancient philosophy. He says man is a social animal, and this is something that goes all the way back to Aristotle. And all we mean by it is that man is a creature that is born in society. There was never a solitary individual or just solitary individuals walking around. Man, from the very beginning, from the earliest traces of man, Homo sapiens, we find man in groups, in some kind of social affiliation, in some kind of community. So we're not just individuals, but rather we are defined by our relationships to others. And just think about yourself. You're an individual, yes, but you're also a worker, you're a student, you're a husband, you're a wife, you're a parent and a grandparent. You belong to this group or that group. You graduated from this college or that college. You're also citizens of a community, of a state, of a country. So Gentile's point is that to speak of man alone in some kind of state of nature is a fiction. Man is at home in community or in society. The second point is that Gentile draws from this. We can conclude that Gentile is a communitarian. And a communitarian here I'm going to classify as somebody as distinguished from the libertarian. The libertarian, of course, knows that man has multiple affiliations above and beyond being an individual, but the libertarian starts with the individual, whereas the communitarian starts with the community, and that's Gentile. Now, at this point, even conservatives can agree with Gentile. Man is a social animal? Yeah, sure. Man exists in society? Yeah, sure. But here, Gentile makes a key move, and this is where we hit a big fork in the road. And that is, Gentile says, now, there are two different types of a democracy, he says, and these are diametrically opposed to each other. One of them he is against, and the other he is for. So what's the democracy that he's against? Well, that's liberal democracy, the democracy of the American founders. And Gentile defines it this way. He says this kind of democracy, liberal democracy, begins with the individual, and it talks about the individual as having rights. It talks about governments existing to protect and advance these rights, specifically the rights of economic activity and trade, the rights of speech, the freedom of religion, the rights of assembly. And basically Gentile says, well, no, these are selfish or bourgeois democracy. This is capitalist democracy, the democracy, as I mentioned, of the American founding. And Gentile goes, this is bad. We don't want any of this. What do we want? Well, Gentile says, I want a different kind of democracy. He calls it sometimes true democracy, but it's democracy in which the individual subordinates himself or herself to society and to the state. Now, right away, you recognize that Gentile here is making a critique of bourgeois democracy, which echoes that of Marx. Marx says that bourgeois democracy is an inferior, it is a weak, it is a bad form, if you will, of democracy. And Gentile admits, he goes, yeah, Marx is in fact my taking off point. You might remember many years ago, in fact, going back to, I think it was 1984, the governor of New York, Mario Cuomo. This, by the way, is the father of Chris Cuomo. He's the father of Andrew Cuomo, who was recently the governor. And Mario Cuomo, in his keynote address at the Democratic Convention, likened America to an extended family. He goes, America's like one big family. And he said, through the agency of government, we look after each other, as if to say that you are somehow in a familial relationship with people you don't know, that you've never met. Nevertheless, for Cuomo, this was the kind of ideal metaphor for government. Government is one big family. And just as you don't begrudge your family members your labor, you're happy if you work and they eat, by and large, Cuomo was saying the same thing. You shouldn't worry if part of your money is taken away to give this guy food and that guy pay that guy's college tuition and help that guy buy a home, because you're all one big family. This is the communitarian outlook that we can see that Cuomo has in common with Marx and also with Giovanni Gentile. And when we pick it up tomorrow, I will spell out more in a more definite way how Gentile uses this to build up an intellectual superstructure that we could call fascism.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.